The morning sun stretched across the rolling fields of my property, warming the rich, fertile soil I had spent years cultivating. Life on my land was simple and peaceful, just the way I liked it. I grew heirloom tomatoes, lavender, and a variety of organic vegetables, nothing too fancy, but enough to supply a few local restaurants and my private customers. Among them was one particularly notable client, the governor himself. His private estate had a personal chef who swore by my fresh produce, and I took pride in delivering the best. Everything was running smoothly until a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox one afternoon. I recognized the dreaded HOA logo immediately. My stomach clenched as I ripped it open, expecting another pointless rule change. Instead, I found a formal notice, a hefty fine for illegal farming activity within the neighborhood. My brows furrowed. Illegal farming? My land had been here long before the HOA was even established, and my property wasn't part of their tiny, manicured neighborhood. Just as I was processing this nonsense, I heard the sharp click of heels approaching. I turned to see a woman in a crisp suit, clipboard in hand, strutting up my driveway with the confidence of someone who thought they owned the place. I knew the type immediately: HOA royalty. She barely glanced at my fields before giving me a forced smile, the kind that barely reached her eyes. "Mr. Dawson, I presume," she said, tapping her clipboard. "I'm Patricia Reynolds, head of the HOA Compliance Board. You should have received your notice by now. Farming within HOA-controlled areas is strictly prohibited." I crossed my arms. "I don't live in an HOA-controlled area." Patricia's smile widened, but it felt more like a baring of teeth. "Oh, but you do. You see, last year, the HOA extended its jurisdiction to surrounding properties for aesthetic consistency. Your land is now under our purview." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You can't just claim my property like that." She gave a dramatic sigh. "You should have attended the town meeting, but don't worry, we'll work with you. If you cease all farming operations immediately, we might consider waiving future fines." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "I've been farming here for over a decade. My land is zoned for agriculture. You can't just fine me because you don't like how it looks." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Well, I suggest you pay attention to the regulations. Otherwise, further penalties will apply." With that, she spun on her heel and strutted away, leaving me fuming in the dust. I glanced at the letter again. A $5,000 fine. My hands clenched. If they thought I was going to roll over and let them dictate what I did on my own land, they were in for a rude awakening. I wasn't about to take this lying down. The next morning, I drove straight to the county records office, determined to prove Patricia and her HOA goons had no right to fine me. I knew my land had always been zoned for agricultural use, long before the suburban neighborhood crept up next to it. After some digging, I confirmed exactly that. My property was legally designated as farmland, untouched by any HOA expansion nonsense. Armed with this knowledge, I marched into the HOA office, ready for a fight. The receptionist, a younger woman with a bored expression, barely looked up as I placed the fine notice on the counter. "I need to speak to Patricia Reynolds," I said. She sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have proof that this fine is bogus." That got her attention. She picked up the phone, muttered something, and within minutes, Patricia emerged from her office, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She eyed me with a smug look as if she had already won. "Ah, Mr. Dawson, what a surprise." I held up my paperwork. "Your fine is invalid. My land is zoned for agriculture. The HOA has no authority over it." Patricia took the documents, glanced over them, then gave a dismissive chuckle. "Well, that's interesting, but the HOA board has already determined that your farming operations disrupt the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood." I narrowed my eyes. "The aesthetic harmony? I live on a farm." She tilted her head as if I were a particularly slow student. "Exactly. And we've received multiple complaints from homeowners about the unsightly nature of your crops and equipment, not to mention the tractor noise. It's all quite disruptive." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "So, let me get this straight. You're fining me because my farm looks like a farm." Patricia gave a fake sympathetic smile. "You do have options. You could replace those large fields with decorative landscaping. Maybe a nice koi pond? It would certainly raise property values. I felt my jaw tighten. You're out of your mind if you think I'm tearing down my livelihood for some overpriced shrubbery. She sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. Well then, I'm afraid the fines will continue. I gritted my teeth. If this woman wanted a war, she was going to get one. But she had no idea who she was messing with, because while she was busy worrying about aesthetic harmony, she clearly had no clue who some of my biggest customers were. A week passed, and the HOA doubled down. Another fine appeared in my mailbox, this time for failure to comply with aesthetic improvement regulations. They even sent a so-called compliance officer to take photos of my land like I was some kind of criminal. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if it wasn't infuriating. I wasn't the only one annoyed either. My workers, a handful of reliable farmhands who had been with me for years, were just as angry. "Boss, this is insane," Jake, my longest-standing employee, grumbled as he tossed hay into the barn. "They can't fine you for having a farm on a farm." "Apparently they can," I muttered. "Or at least they think they can." Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled up near the gate. I recognized it immediately. It was one of the governor's vehicles. The driver stepped out and opened the back door, and out stepped Governor Mitchell himself, dressed in his usual no-nonsense suit. He was an older man, a straight-shooter who didn't have time for nonsense, which was probably why we got along so well. "Dawson," he greeted, shaking my hand. "Got my usual order ready." "Of course," I said, gesturing toward the crates of produce we had prepped. "But you might be getting it from a different supplier soon if the HOA has its way." The governor raised an eyebrow. "The HOA?" I let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, apparently my farm is aesthetically pleasing enough for the neighborhood. They've been fining me for illegal farming." Governor Mitchell stared at me for a second before breaking into a grin. "Illegal farming? Do they even know who they're dealing with?" "Clearly not," I said, "and they have no clue where some of my crops are going." The governor chuckled, rubbing his chin. Well, well, this could be interesting." At that moment, Patricia's voice rang out from behind the fence. "Excuse me, you can't park that vehicle there. This is a private community." I turned, and sure enough, she was storming toward us, clipboard in hand, her expression full of righteous indignation. Her eyes darted between me and the governor, not recognizing him immediately. "Mr. Dawson, I see you're continuing to violate our regulations." Then she gestured to the governor's SUV. "And this is an unauthorized vehicle." I barely contained my amusement as Governor Mitchell turned to face her, crossing his arms. "Unauthorized, huh?" Patricia huffed, still clueless. "Yes, we have very strict parking rules here. You can't just have random visitors." The governor smirked. "Ma'am, do you have any idea who I am?" Patricia scoffed. "I don't care who you are. Rules are rules." I watched in delight as Governor Mitchell pulled out his ID and held it up. Patricia's face drained of color the moment she read the name. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Now," the governor said smoothly, "would you like to explain why you're fining the farm that supplies my private estate?" Patricia looked like she wanted to melt into the ground. I crossed my arms, enjoying every second of it. This was only the beginning. Patricia's face went through several shades of red before settling on a pale, horrified expression. She stammered, her confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of realization. I wasn't aware." Governor Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Not aware? You mean to tell me you're issuing fines without even knowing who you're targeting?" He let out a dry chuckle. "That's some real top-tier leadership, Ms. Reynolds." Patricia swallowed hard, clearly scrambling to salvage what little dignity she had left. "Governor Mitchell, I assure you, the HOA has strict policies in place to maintain property values and uphold community standards." The governor waved a dismissive hand. "Spare me the speech. Dawson's farm is one of the best in the state. My private chef swears by his produce. And yet here you are trying to shut him down because you don't like the way it looks." He shook his head in disbelief. "Tell me, Ms. Reynolds, do you plan on explaining to the state why one of its top agricultural suppliers is being harassed by a homeowners association?" I could see Patricia's mind racing, trying to find an escape route. I wasn't trying to harass anyone, she insisted, forcing a nervous laugh. It's just certain residents have expressed concerns about. The governor held up a hand. Let me guess, aesthetic harmony. Patricia shut her mouth. I smirked. Funny thing is, I don't recall signing anything that put my land under HOA control. And as far as zoning laws go, I'm well within my rights to operate my farm as I see fit. Patricia's jaw clenched. She knew she had overstepped, but she wasn't ready to back down just yet. Regardless of zoning, the HOA still has the right to enforce community standards. Governor Mitchell cut her off. You might want to double-check that, because I'll be having a little chat with some folks at the county office. If I find out you've been overreaching your authority, I guarantee you won't like the consequences. Patricia's expression flickered with panic for a split second before she forced a tight smile. That won't be necessary, Governor. I'm sure we can come to a reasonable resolution. I leaned in slightly, enjoying how the tables had turned. Oh, I think we will, and I've got a feeling you're not going to like it. Patricia swallowed hard and straightened her clipboard. I need to consult with the board. You do that, I said, watching as she spun on her heel and practically speed-walked away. The governor turned to me with a smirk. She's going to regret this. I nodded. Oh, she has no idea what's coming. Because now it wasn't just about stopping the fines. It was about making sure Patricia and her precious HOA learned a lesson they'd never forget. And I had the perfect plan brewing. Patricia thought she could just walk away and make this problem disappear, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. She had thrown the first punch, and now it was my turn. I spent the next couple of days laying the groundwork for my plan, one that would be completely legal, painfully ironic, and utterly humiliating for her precious HOA. First, I made a few calls. The governor, amused by the whole situation, offered his full support. Not only did he agree to publicly acknowledge my farm's importance, but he also hinted at using the situation to highlight overreach by HOAs in rural areas. That alone would make Patricia sweat, but I wasn't stopping there. Next, I reached out to a few friends in local media. They loved a good underdog story, especially one involving an overbearing HOA picking a fight with a state-endorsed farm. A couple of them agreed to casually drive by and take note of any interesting developments. Then came the final touch, an invitation. I sent a formal letter to the HOA board inviting them to a special event at my farm. The excuse? A local agriculture awareness day to educate the community on the benefits of sustainable farming. I even threw in a line about how wonderful it would be for the HOA to show their commitment to supporting local businesses. It was the kind of public relations stunt Patricia wouldn't dare turn down, especially with the governor's name tied to it. The trap was set. When the day arrived, I made sure everything was perfect. Rows of fresh produce were on display, my workers were dressed in clean uniforms, and my equipment was polished to a shine. Even the governor's chef was on site, preparing small samples of dishes made from my crops. I had invited my regular customers, a few local officials, and of course the media. The only people who didn't know what was coming were Patricia and her HOA lackeys. Right on cue, a convoy of HOA members arrived, led by Patricia herself. She had on her usual smug expression, likely thinking this was an opportunity to spin the narrative in her favor. That confidence wavered the moment she spotted the governor, standing near a news crew, laughing as he chatted with reporters. I greeted her with a broad smile. Ms. Reynolds, glad you could make it. Patricia's eyes darted around, her mind clearly piecing things together. What is this? She asked, her voice tight. Oh, just a little event to showcase the value of local farming, I said innocently. I figured, since the HOA was so interested in my operation, you'd want to see it up close. The cameras were rolling. The governor turned toward us and clapped a hand on my shoulder. Dawson's farm is an asset to the entire state. It's not every day you get produce so fresh that even my personal chef swears by it. He grinned at the reporters. In fact, I might have to recommend more state contracts for this place. Patricia paled. The reporters turned their mics toward her, waiting for a response. She was cornered. And this was only the beginning. Patricia's forced smile twitched as the cameras zoomed in on her. She knew she was trapped. Any attempt to downplay my farm now would make her look like a fool, especially with the governor standing right there praising my crops like they were made of gold. But I wasn't done yet. "Well, Ms. Reynolds," I said, keeping my tone light but firm, "since you've been so concerned about my illegal farming, perhaps you'd like to explain to the governor and the media exactly why you find me." Patricia cleared her throat, glancing nervously at the cameras. "The HOA's regulations exist to maintain property values and ensure a visually harmonious community." The governor raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying that a thriving farm, one that supplies fresh, organic produce to my estate and top restaurants, is a threat to property values?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The reporters leaned in, eager for her response. Sweat beaded at her temple as she realized there was no good way to spin this. I decided to twist the knife. "Funny thing is, I checked the zoning laws. My farm predates your entire HOA, and legally you have no say over my land. So I have to ask, was this really about harmony? Or did you just not like the look of a farm next to your perfectly manicured suburb?" A murmur spread through the crowd. The HOA board members behind Patricia shuffled uncomfortably, clearly realizing they had hitched their wagon to the wrong horse. The governor chuckled. "I'd say it looks pretty good to me." He gestured toward the neatly arranged produce stands, the delicious aroma wafting from his chef's cooking station. "In fact, I'd argue this farm adds more value to the community than any cookie-cutter HOA ever could." The reporters ate it up. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered. Patricia looked like she wanted to sink into the earth. And then came the final blow. One of my farmhands walked up with a clipboard. "Boss, I've got the updated contract from the State Department. They're increasing our supply order." He made sure to say it loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Apparently, the governor's team wants even more of our produce going to government offices." I turned to Patricia with a smirk. "Seems like my unsightly farm is about to become even more important." She was seething, her nails digging into her clipboard. She knew she had lost. The cameras, the governor, the officials, it was all too much. If she kept pushing, she'd look even worse. Finally, she swallowed her pride and forced out the words through gritted teeth. "The HOA will reconsider the fines." I grinned. "Oh, don't worry, I'll be expecting an official letter confirming that." She nodded stiffly, then turned on her heel and stormed off, her board members awkwardly following behind her. The governor clapped me on the back. "That was fun." I chuckled. "Yeah, and the best part, she's not done paying for this yet." Because while she might have dropped the fines, her humiliation was just beginning. Patricia might have thought she could cut her losses and walk away with some dignity, but the universe, and my carefully laid plans, had other ideas. The news story about the HOA versus the governor's farm spread like wildfire. It started locally with headlines mocking the HOA for trying to find a state-endorsed farm out of existence. But then, the internet did what it does best. It turned Patricia into a viral joke. Memes flooded social media. One showed a picture of a perfectly manicured suburban lawn with the caption, "HOA approved, looks nice, feeds no one." Another featured Patricia's flustered face during the press conference next to a photo of my farm with the words, "HOA hates fresh food, film at 11. Even late-night talk shows picked up the story. One comedian dramatically read the original fine notice aloud, then mockingly gasped, "Oh no, not fresh vegetables. Won't somebody think of their aesthetics asterisk?" The audience howled with laughter. As for the HOA itself, the backlash hit them hard. Residents who had previously been too scared to speak up were suddenly emboldened. They flooded the next HOA meeting, demanding to know why Patricia had embarrassed the entire community. Some questioned if she was misusing her authority elsewhere. A petition started circulating to remove her from the board entirely. And Patricia, well, she was spiraling. I saw her once, about a week after the fiasco, skulking around the HOA office in sunglasses like she was trying to avoid being recognized. The confident, clipboard-wielding tyrant was gone. In her place was a woman who had become a laughingstock. One of my farmhands, Jake, leaned against the truck and smirked as he watched her hurry past. "Hey, boss," he called out loud enough for her to hear. "Think we should send her a thank you basket? After all, she gave us free advertising." Patricia stiffened but didn't turn around. She just walked faster. I grinned. "Great idea, Jake. Maybe a nice asterisk aesthetically pleasing arrangement of fresh produce." We both laughed as she practically dove into her car and sped off. She had tried to run me off my own land. Instead, she had made me more successful than ever. And as for the HOA, their days of unchecked power were coming to an end. Justice had never tasted so sweet. With Patricia humiliated and the HOA in full retreat, life on the farm returned to normal, except in some ways it was even better. Business had skyrocketed thanks to all the media attention. More local restaurants wanted my produce, and the governor's team expanded their orders, ensuring my farm would be thriving for years to come. But the cherry on top, the HOA itself was imploding. Residents, fed up with Patricia's antics, pushed for a vote to remove her from the board. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed with angry homeowners, many of whom had never even attended before. When Patricia tried to defend herself, someone stood up and read one of the news headlines out loud. "HOA fines farmer supplying the governor's mansion." The room burst into laughter. She turned redder than a ripe tomato. In the end, the vote wasn't even close. Patricia was ousted. She had spent years ruling over the neighborhood like a queen, but now she was just another former HOA tyrant with no power. Rumor had it, she put her house up for sale shortly after. Apparently, the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood just wasn't the same anymore. As for me, I celebrated the best way I knew how, by throwing a huge farm-to-table event right on my land. Friends, customers, and even a few HOA members, the reasonable ones, showed up to enjoy the fresh food that Patricia had once tried to banish. At one point, the governor himself raised a glass. "To Dawson's farm," he said with a grin. "May it continue to ruin the aesthetic of nosy HOA boards everywhere." The crowd erupted in cheers. I leaned back in my chair, feeling completely at peace. My farm was safe, business was booming, and the HOA had learned a lesson they wouldn't forget anytime soon. And the best part, Patricia would have to live with the knowledge that every time someone in town bit into a fresh tomato or enjoyed a crisp salad at a restaurant, they'd be eating from the very farm she had tried to shut down. Now that asterisk was poetic justice.